In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
You might remember Memphian coach Bill Courtney from the Oscar-winning documentary Undefeated. Now, he's got an awesome movement and podcast called An Army of Normal Folks that you can check out at normalfolks.us.
I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we're joined by a man named Andrew Cates. He's the head of Memphis 4th Estate, Inc. I look forward to meeting him and talking to him, so stay with us for a conversation with Andrew Cates. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Youth Villages. Andy, hi, how are you?
Hello, Eric. Good to meet you.
Did you like that introduction?
Yes.
That was really good.
Memphis 4th Estate. Andrew.
Yeah, I know. I don't think I've ever called you that.
Very formal.
Memphis 4th Estate being the nonprofit entity that owns and operates the Daily Memphian, and you are the board chair, and you and I are a couple of co-founders of Daily Memphian, and this is our annual sit here and lament and talk and celebrate everything Daily Memphian. We've done it usually around the anniversary. We didn't this year, but I actually think going into the new year, it's kind of good just to talk to people about where we are.
I think you should make a New Year's resolution, and every one of your podcasts we should do it every week.
We should do it every week.
It'd be awesome.
We could have you on. You could be like my sidekick. You could be my sidekick.
Crush the ratings.
My
literally.
McMahon.
I did think this was going to be your annual review.
Yeah, that's definitely. Let's do the annual review too. Which is a very funny thing, by the way. So I have been working since I was, a long time ago, and a couple years ago, you asked me at Daily Memphian, hey, we're doing annual reviews, right? And I was like, no, because I've never run companies, I've never done annual reviews, but I was fine with it. I was like, yeah, we'll put it, and we do annual reviews now. And he said, yeah, you should have an annual review. And I said, sure. So you and I do what we normally do is we go get lunch, you walk in, we talk about all kinds of stuff for a minute, and then you pull out this little index card and you go, okay, so the annual review. And I said, Andy, you have to know that this is the first annual review I've ever had. I was 55.
Raised by wolves.
And you were literally like, that's not possible. And then we talked through my work history with Bob Towery and Peter Scott and companies in New York. And I was like, no, I've never worked for anyone that does an annual
After being
review.
friends for decades and working together on this for 7+ years,
yeah.
I can confirm you've never had a boss or a board. Don't edit that.
I have a board.
I said until now.
Until now.
I'm his boss on Thursday.
I know. And then Natalie's here, my boss.
Natalie has been your boss. That's true.
This is true. It is 7.
That's why I call Natalie when I need help.
Can we get this worked out?
I'm going to remember that.
But I don't know. So it's 7.5 years for me and you, give or take, coming up on. It's actually 7 in May since formation. So God.
Yeah.
It's over 7.5 years. And when you wrote a column at year end, and I guess it was sort of that. I saw that, and Natalie saw it. She's like, we should have Andy on again. I don't know. How do you? You and I are so close to this that it's sometimes hard to have perspective, I think. And I think we talk about that. We're so hard on each other and the thing, and yet we did 7,500 stories last year. We were doing amazing work on Fagans. We did really well financially. I mean,
not well enough. We need help. We need help.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that too. But anyway, I don't know. How do you think about 7.5 years of this?
Exhausted.
Yeah.
But good. I mean, it is hugely positive, and I am exhausted. So are you. And then so many people have done it, and so I do get nervous on the co-founder thing. Truly, because it's the term. The city has embraced it. We've got super users who have been unbelievably supportive. And that's I guess maybe the most encouraging aspect of this is the fact that we are healthy financially, never healthy enough, but healthy and stable. And we have folks who have been extraordinarily generous in so many ways, time, money, talent. And I feel strongly that we're, of course, imperfect, but I know of no major supporter or partner or board member or participant in any meaningful way who would say, of course, everybody thinks we can be better, but everybody's generally very pleased. That's hard to do. It's hard to have something work out that way, and it says a lot about Memphis too. And I heard something today, interestingly, from a friend that it is so. And I like this. This was said it was done for Memphis and people that love Memphis. And I really hadn't thought about that. And I don't mean that self-righteously, but when you think about a lot of businesses and certainly a lot of media initiatives, it doesn't necessarily start with because we love the place. And frankly, a lot of them start with who do we need to go take down because they're not behaving. Yeah. And that doesn't mean you don't have to have things like, hold people accountable. But when you're starting from the place of how do we help make the city better, which includes holding people accountable, but also includes raising people up, that's fun to be a part of.
I think also there's a way in which and this is true of a lot of nonprofits and a lot of companies and stuff too, but it can happen in media, and without naming names, I can look around the country at other nonprofit local news entities, and there's a whole insular thing to them. It's not just that they're kind of about their own success, they're not really embedded in their community in the way I think that we always tried to be, and we do imperfectly, but that they're even almost kind of hostile to their communities, or they're not, which is different than saying that we should be puff piece stuff, and we should and we don't. I mean, I think if you look at the track record of the last month of stories we did today, that we're taping this last week, I mean, difficult stories that we're publishing that are really hard on people and hard about the community, but that we do from a place of, I don't know, if it's from care, but of the importance of what we do. Yeah. And it's a really easy, I see it at these conferences. You've had the joy of going with me to at least one of these conferences, maybe a couple. And I'm really excited. I'm excited to not be going to it this year. I know. This is, But no, and speaking of that the national conferences, that's the other thing, naively, it's always fascinating whenever all of us work on a project and something so important that's important to us and to the city. I don't think we ever did this assuming there would be national support, but we certainly assumed there'd be a darn good chance of it. And there were specific groups that we thought, frankly, even in very, very, very early conversations, that foreshadowed or hinted that there would be support. And then we haven't gotten that support other than Knight, which is a big, for those who don't know, Knight Foundation's in Miami and a major media donor and trying to transform a lot of this of the entire framework of nonprofit journalism. But it is not shocking, but disappointing there's not been more recognition of our model. And I don't know, some of that's also being in Memphis, in Middle America. Some of that is people are not happy that we have any form of paywall whatsoever, even though we provide tons of free content. And so it's that part, it gets frustrating, but we just keep trying. It's worth noting that, there's tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone into local news in the last decade. And more come in through this Press Forward initiative and so on that we're trying to get in. And we've raised, since our start, $18 million, 20 coming up on 20. Yeah. We've generated that much again
since
in earned
inception.
Revenue. Since inception. So every year, last year, we'll talk a bit more, but last year we were about 75% earned revenue, subscriptions and advertising, 25% foundations. This year, I think we'll be about 80-20, and we'll keep squeezing that down. But of that $20 million, I think 400 has come from outside Memphis. Yeah. Which is kind of, arrogant. This sounds arrogant to people listening, but it is kind of maddening that the amount of money that national foundations have put into local news entities and have completely bypassed the Daily Memphian. The caveat I would put, they have every right to do what they want. Sure. But the reason I would agree with you, and it's doubly maddening, is if your thesis as a national donor is that you want to come up with a business model, you want to support a business model that's just about, quote, sustainability and that can survive because you're taking on a extraordinarily important industry that has collapsed, being especially local newspapers specifically. And then you're not going to support the most successful model so far, at least from the standpoint of sustainability. They don't have to say they like how we do things. Right. It's frustrating. So, but again, all we can do is keep our head down, which is what we do, and we'll keep on keeping on. And I think inevitably, the more we do this work, the more it is appreciated
and the model is appreciating that what we're doing is we're pulling it off.
I mean, I still think we've said this, but I do think that more people will come to realize they cannot have 80% of their budget come from foundations and high net worth individuals and membership and all kinds of things. We're taking Andy's picture right now. It's just going really
It's really
well. Poor
uncomfortable
Natalie.
too.
I know.
Natalie's
I know. Most people don't act this way. You are literally acting like a child on picture day as she just tries to subtly take a picture. And we're having a serious conversation about the state of local news and the importance of the Daily Memphian. Oh, do that. That's a good one. We're going to put all these up. We'll put all of these great photos up. Yeah, but we'll Photoshop it. Yeah, we'll Photoshop that. We make it all work. What do I like to say? We'll fix that in post. It's maddening, but it is funny too because I get all the time, even though we don't get. And again, this sounds like us whining, and I don't mean it that way. I just think it's a bizarre observation of the state of local news and all this money that's gone in to kind of fix the problem of 90% of the people being laid off over the last 20, 25 years. I get people on the sidelines of these conferences all the time like, oh, I've heard about y'all. You guys are amazing. That's incredible you did that. But, I mean, they were far more of them are impressed by, or heard about us, are blown away. If I tell them the story, at the buffet bar at some conference, they're like, how'd you guys do that? I'm like, well, it's hard work. Yeah. Memphis is kind of amazing that way and so on. But there's this strange, but you got that paywall. And you've got, I don't know, there's some unease about us that I still think that eventually, as I was saying before you started being goofy with the photos, is there will be people who will realize, hey, we can't raise 80% of and have a meaningfully sized newsroom. You might support 2 or 3 journalists, and that's great. Yeah. Awesome. Go for it. That's fantastic. But if you're going to have the 40 journalists, which we have, and more than that, when you add up all the freelancers, you're not doing that through philanthropy only.
I think there's an underdog thing to it too, though, because if you have this came together because of so many, including you, in a big way. There's so many people, and there were so many things that were going our way, but that also were pretty unique ingredients. And I think inevitably, it is difficult. It's hard to pull all that together. Yeah. And you're laughing. I don't know.
No. I'm really not laughing at you. I'm sorry.
I don't know if
the photo thing continues. Yeah. Like it just literally it's like your 3rd grade picture day.
Yeah. Can we just have set up a separate meeting for my picture? It is frustrating, and I don't think it's and we can move on from it. But don't underestimate that. Why the hell Memphis? And I'm not. That's not the inferiority complex thing. It is. You've got a mid-sized city that's not one of your hot super growth cities. Yeah. And I mean, I even remember, and you and I've discussed this, someone who assumed that I was talking about Nashville for an hour.
You were early on when you were talking about
not to be repeated who it was. But I think you may be thinking about our capital city that we do not share a lot in common with. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah. I got invited to a conference. It was a local media conference 2 years ago that was in Nashville. And the guy who invited, was like, I guess we all kind of think that's just like a 20-minute drive for you, huh? It's a little longer than I guess. I don't know.
Not a suburb.
They're from the north.
Not a suburb.
Not the northeast. Yeah. We'll talk more here with Andy about the 7+ years of Daily Memphian, at least for me and him and some others. But let me take a minute and do some housekeeping. Remind everyone, I'm Eric Barnes. It's The Sidebar. Airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. Focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's also not just a radio show. It's one of a number of weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Memphis Grizzlies podcast with Drew Hill and Chris Harrington, our food podcast Soundbites with Holly Whitfield and Jennifer Chandler, our food writer. That one also airs here on WYXR every Thursday at 11, right before The Sidebar. We also host the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, the show that we do with the good folks over at WKNO every week. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get the WYXR shows at WYXR.org or on the WYXR app. That includes all of the WYXR shows, the talk shows, the music shows, archives of all of them. It's a great way to keep up with WYXR. WYXR, which we are a partner in, the Daily Memphian's a partner in, and Andy was a big part of sort of pulling all that together, and others, but to give Andy his credit. support WYXR. It's a nonprofit. It's listener-supported radio. Become a member. You get all kinds of benefits, or you can just do a one-off donation at WYXR.org or on the app. And if you're not a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, do consider becoming one. Paid subscriptions, as we'll talk a bit more about here with Andy, are more than 50% of what pays the bills here at the Daily Memphian. It's the largest, far and away the largest at this point, newsroom in the area, and one of the largest nonprofit newsrooms in the country. That's become a paid subscriber, and if you're already a paid subscriber, you can also donate. Recently, we had, last week we had Paul Chandler from GPAC talking about GPAC. We were talking about the Live Nation and the new Crosstown venue, just because he's been in that business for so long. It was really interesting, and he had a lot to share about lots of different venues in town. Some we recorded, some we could not. We also had Todd Richardson on the show, speaking of the venue, talking about Crosstown and the new venue. Kevin Sharp from the Dixon and DeMarcus Suggs from the new Director of Creative and Cultural Economy. All those shows are available wherever you get your podcasts. I mentioned Behind the Headlines. We recently had Mayor Lee Harris and Judge Tarek Sugarman talking about juvenile justice, juvenile crime, that whole process. It was great, really interesting conversation. We had the outgoing and incoming chairs of the Memphis City Council, a couple of county commissioners. We had Steve Mulroy, DA, on about a month, 8 weeks ago now, but still very relevant, as was the show we did with Brett Taylor and London Lamar, 2 state senators from the area. And last bit of housekeeping, our Women in Business seminar is coming up on February 27th at 3:30 at the Botanic Garden. You can get tickets by going to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian, or if you go into the navigation at Daily Memphian, you'll see a thing for events. Tina Sullivan, former head of the Overland Park Conservancy, friend of mine, friend of Andy's. She'll be on the panel, as well as Ursula Madden, Lee Mansberg from Junior Achievement. So again, that's February 27th at 3:30 at the Botanic Gardens. You got to get tickets, so go to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian. But we're here with Andy Cates here with another 10 minutes.
That's because like everything you just said was 10 minutes.
I know,
So
it's a lot of housekeeping, but there's a lot going on.
But have you thought about doing like an automated, we talk about efficiency all the time, why not just pre-record it and then hit a button and then Natalie can add it?
Information is fresh.
Because it's fresh, because I drop in little tidbits. I'm a media professional, Andy. I mean, I've been doing this
Next
stuff
time we
for
interview,
15
if you could interview me, then I'm going to go like take a break and then just Natalie can text me like you can come back in now.
You can come back in
Yeah,
now.
but anyway. So.
Yeah, but I like to do it because I have a script. But just for the avid listeners, there's always a little bit that I either screw up that Natalie, because she's mean to me, doesn't fix, or that I drop in, or I recently called, I won't say who, but I called a guest during the recording, literally be like, well, and we're here with Rick Cates, how are you? And didn't notice, they didn't notice, and she had to take it out after. So you just never knew where things
Does he
could
always
go.
talk more than his guests?
Yes.
Okay, but like, have you ever done like a scorecard and literally just keep it?
I can just see the waveform on the audio file.
That's actually brilliant. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
Okay, I'll shut up now.
What is your question?
You can go and ask me questions now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm here with Eric Barnes,
So we did do
CEO of
that.
Daily Memphian.
One thing we has evolved over time, and you addressed it in your end of your column on the Daily Memphian. People can go look at it. Was how much financial? Like, there's a certain amount of financial information that's out on a 990 because we're a nonprofit, but you really wanted to, and I thought it was really good. And I don't know why there were some years where we hesitated to say, hey, 50% of our revenue comes from subscriptions. Here's how much we spend. And here's how much we have to fundraise every year and why. And that's been kind of an evolution.
I don't think it was a hesitation. I don't think it was a hesitation. I think there's two. I think it's great to have out there. I think I have noticed peers have done that more aggressively, more proactively. I thought, you and I talk to people and our other board members and other leaders within our organization. We talk about it all the time openly.
Right.
It's never been a secret. The other thing to remember is we've also grown it. And so we're getting to a point of more of a stabilized run rate that is more consistent, we hope, and stable as far as growing off that base. So I think part of it is because it's significantly grown into this. Part of it was we've been sharing that, but we weren't as deliberate of treating. And that was, I'd like to do this every year and treat it more as an annual report. And no one wants to read a 30-page annual report. But I think everybody would be interested, and I've gotten good feedback of, yes, thanks. We want to know how the organization's funded and where are we. And then inevitably, folks, we do, and to those listening, we have the delicate balance between, for everyone's benefit, including our teams, we need to have stability and a comfort that we're going to be around. But frankly, we also run the risk that if folks get too comfortable that we're fine, people aren't as motivated to support us, and I understand that because there's a lot of needs. but we need that ongoing support. Yeah. So I feel like we'll do that more more consistently, and I think I'm pleased you say that. And I think again, it has been good. People have given good feedback. The one last thing, we mentioned it before, and we should all be very proud of and appreciative to the listeners and to the Memphians and the Daily Memphian subscribers. No one else in the country has this percentage of operating income toward their annual costs. And that's hard to believe, but it's true. And so that gets back to that, we don't have to revisit it, but back to that frustration of the national supporters of this is that we can find, and we look all the time and we found no one correct us. There is no other nonprofit local paper of record that has this much effectively self-driven revenue.
There's a very prominent person in nonprofit local news who I won't name because it gets ugly, but they're a very talented, successful person who's done tremendous journalism in the country. So I don't want to take away from that. But they were at a presentation I was at, and I told you about this. I got into a spirited discussion with this person because they said, well, I work now that I'm on my own kind of consulting, and I work with these nonprofit local news sites, and they'll tell me that their revenue mix. And I say, no, you got to diversify. You need to have foundations, high net worth individuals, people who are, kind of do sponsorships to support your mission, and then membership programs. And that's diversity. And I finally couldn't take it anymore. I raised my hand and I said, but that's all philanthropy. Everything you're saying. And they were like, well, yeah, but it's diverse sources of philanthropy. And I was just like, I would be dead if we had to raise $5.5 million a year. Well, one, we wouldn't be able to do it. As generous as Memphis has been and incredible, it wouldn't be possible. So we would be this much smaller thing. We'd pick and choose our spots even more than we do now in terms of what we cover. Yeah. It's just a maddening thing. I'm back to that, sorry. I think I know because I've heard you answer this question, but let's pretend I hadn't. Because when I do a solicitation letter and, they were like, hey, why don't you just raise your rates on your subscriptions? I mean, why don't you guys just make it work on subscriptions or advertisements? Why do you think we have to raise effectively $1 million a year or more to continue to support the mission? Why isn't it possible to squeeze that gap?
Because I think the business model is that broken. And so I think the fact that we've been able to squeeze it down to, I look at it the other way and say for $1 million to $1.5 million a year for a community of, broader community, 1.2 million, for that to be the cost, and I don't say these are big dollar amounts, but for that to be the cost to have an extraordinarily high quality balanced paper of record that is done for the city and that is a civic and civic asset. To me that is a good deal for the city, for the community. The other thing I would say that we don't, you and I have talked on this in the past. We made a mistake, and we both agree on this. Is paywall is, we've joked about this on this before. You might as well say pornography. When you go to these national media conferences and they talk about sustainability, and then the first thing we say is, well, you need to have subscription revenue. That's people, and frankly, we all pay for things that we value. And those that can't pay for it or should be given, there should be some thought about that as well. So we do provide for free for students, as an example, and teachers. But what's comical is how many people have fought back on, well, it should be 100% free, including the person you're referencing, who I know you're talking about. The part we've failed is we did a binary deal where we didn't say, first of all, we think we don't apologize for the subscription revenue part of that, but guess what? We provide a ton of free content.
So much free content.
So the mistake we made is we got cornered by some of these folks who said we had a, quote, paywall, which is again like saying we had a pornography, we're a pornographic media source. And we really needed to early on say, we have subscription revenue, but we provide an enormous amount of free content on a daily basis. And then of course we always provide free for elections, always provide free for emergencies. All of our COVID was free. And we've never gotten credit for that. And I think that's going to change, but we needed to jump on that early, and we needed to call it a hybrid model and not a paywall, whatever. But that kind of lessons learned, and sharing with folks that have asked us about this, if they are looking at doing this in their cities, I've said, don't do not say the word paywall. Just
Yeah.
don't even, it's a dirty word to
Well,
certain
and
funders.
when we quantify it, and I think you and I were both in the same meeting with somebody from a national foundation that's done a lot of funding of other local nonprofits and is receptive to our model, and we're still talking to them. And I said, well, the thing about the hybrid, I mean, we have, before you get to how many we have paid subscribers, we've got 175,000 email recipients of all of our 40 different emails. Just the morning edition alone, you honestly, I mean, I said it in a staff meeting recently, I'm like, you honestly can get the morning edition, which is free from us, and pretty much stay up with the news at a basic level.
Which is actually one of my critiques of us as operators.
I know, exactly.
We
and I
need
go
to
back and
revisit
forth,
that,
and you and I
by the way.
had this conversation.
It's
We're like, we got to
overly
stop
generous.
doing that. Yeah, right. And we did actually trim down. There aren't as many excerpts and so on. But there's all this stuff. And
how many free articles we provide?
How
Too many free articles.
And then all the social media stuff. Like we were looking at year-end numbers and how much our Instagram following grew. And we got how many, it's like tens of paid subscriptions that we can trace back to Instagram. And yet we have this massive I think it's 40,000 people or something now. It's some big number, all this engagement. I'm like, great. Meta gets more money because we are giving them all, it's this, so back to the hybrid thing. If it is part of what will bug me about the criticism of you guys are operating like a business. Like if we were the Wall Street Journal, are you kidding?
Yeah.
We cost $300 a year. All this stuff would be paid, but that's not supporting the mission. It's
and it gets back to a lot of things. It's a lot easier to throw grenades when you're not in the community, and this is also why we've been asked. Would you do this in another city? No. I mean, this is a Memphis that we'd share our playbook and do share our playbook, but not doing this again.
We also have lives and partners and family and things.
And I would have an ex-wife if we did it in another one of these.
I don't need any
so
more.
That is where zero regrets overall, but lessons learned and tactics of certain words we'd say differently.
You and I, we've done this, like I was saying, most every year, and we talk about the whole thing of we're friends and we're neighbors, and then just kind of the evolution of talking about what are we going to do, what is the city going to do about as the commercial appeal, through no fault of anyone here, no fault of theirs, began to decline. I can't remember if I've ever asked you, because back at the old Daily News and then doing behind the headlines and all that, and you and I were friends, we had no notion we were going to do this, but we would talk about news all the time. You'd pick my brain on stuff like that. Where did you really do have a genuine love for and genuine respect for journalism that's just innate to how you view things. Where did that come from?
I had a grandmother I never met who was a teacher and went to Columbia in a master's program. I didn't, of course, find out until I was an adult. She had to have been one of the first Southern women from Mississippi to go to Columbia, and was a writer. And then I was brought up where the paper was and even when I worked in Dallas, my first job, I got the Dallas Morning News. And then working on the Grizzlies, I would say engaging with Calkins and how beyond critical Jeff was to the Grizzlies effort, and which was like a negotiation because you're constantly, he did his job as an extraordinary journalist, but he was also unapologetically supportive, but he was also going to make damn sure he had all the facts.
Yeah.
And so I got to see through projects I've worked on in Memphis how unbelievably critical the coverage was for those things to even work and for the community to discuss them. And then when the commercial appeal, I don't mind saying this, and we always do the disclaimer, I'm not trying to pick on the current people of the commercial appeal. But when it started failing, I would tell you the other thing, and we all claim to be entrepreneurial, and entrepreneurs go immediately attack things where they see a failure or an opportunity. And when we all saw it failing and what that was doing, that became an obvious gaping wound that we had to address. And so, that, as we've said before, that started with trying to buy the commercial appeal, which thank goodness did not happen. It wouldn't have been the right answer.
Which, by the way, is not a knock on them. It's just the
business
baggage of that model was so heavy.
And I don't mind saying this again it's just truth, and it's not meant as disrespect. The business model does not work, and it's a for-profit model in an industry that no longer works for all the reasons we've talked about. So it's not meant to be mean-spirited. It's meant to be, and then very frankly, not because the local folks, but the overlords that run that business, they were pulling resources out of Memphis dramatically. Yeah. So it was a mixture of love for journalism, my belief in the extraordinary importance of the Fourth Estate, never more important than in today's environment, mixed with civically understanding you've got to have this community bulletin board and this place for community conversation. If you don't have that, you can't have a healthy community.
We're out of time because I talked too much in the middle and my questions were too long. So I'm sorry.
And also your announcement was 20 minutes easy. So
no, there's a lot in there though. What do I leave
good.
out?
Yeah,
what do I leave out? All right. Thanks all. Bye.